Today I will tell you a story, unlike any love story you've ever heard. It is the tale of a young woman, cast aside by her own family, sent in the place of her sister as a mail-order bride. She was meant to be nothing more than a substitute, yet destiny led her to a cowboy who had loved her all along, waiting in silence and faith. In the Wild West, where storms and schemes ruled the land, could true love rise above deceit, ambition, and even betrayal within her own blood? Stay with me until the end of this journey to discover the answer. If these Wild West stories bring back old memories and touch your heart, please subscribe to the channel so we can preserve and share them together so they will never be forgotten. The Nebraska dawn bled pale gold across the plains, a light that softened nothing. It only sharpened the edges of what Hale already knew, that she was the daughter no one asked for, the one who could be shifted and traded like a pawn without consequence. She stood in the cold shadows of the stairwell, fingers pressed against the rough wood, listening to voices that cut sharper than any knife. Her father's voice carried through the farmhouse kitchen, gravel hard, unyielding. Then it's decided. Phoebe won't go. We'll send Carol instead. The words landed with the weight of a gavel. Carol's breath caught, chest tightening against the silence she dared not break. Her mother murmured something too low to hear. Perhaps a protest, perhaps only resignation. But Silas Hale was not a man swayed by soft tones. He had built his small reputation on sternness, on holding his family like reins in a clenched fist. Carol pictured him there by the stove, tall, weathered eyes, cold as a January sky. He never raised his voice. He didn't have to. Phoebe's reply was silk over steel. "I won't be carted off to some wilderness ranch," she declared. Carol could hear the petulant tremor beneath the words, though she knew her sister's tears would look angelic, shimmering like dew on porcelain skin. "I belong here in town. Samuel Morrison has been calling on me. He owns the general store, father. It would be a much better match." Carol pressed her lips together, eyes stinging in the dim hallway. Phoebe always knew how to tilt the world in her favor. Blonde hair gleaming in any light, eyes blue enough to catch sympathy without effort. Phoebe was the daughter others bent toward. Carol, with her work-roughened hands and auburn hair that frizzed in the humidity of summer, was the one who bent instead. Silas's verdict came like thunder. "Then Carol will go. She'll keep the bargain. A man has sent money, and this family will not be shamed." In that moment, Carol felt herself shrink smaller than the stairwell's shadows. She wasn't asked. She wasn't even considered. She was simply chosen because she was expendable, because no one in Nebraska had ever paused long enough to see her as anything but Phoebe's dull reflection. She crept back to her room, where the single cracked mirror reflected a face she barely recognized. 25 years old, lines of quiet labor etched faintly at the corners of her mouth. She touched the glass with her fingertips as though she might smooth herself into something worthy. But mirrors didn't lie. Neither did fathers. By dawn's full light, her fate was sealed. A small trunk sat at the foot of her bed, hastily packed by her mother with practical dresses, a Bible, and jars of preserves. Not gifts, just tools for survival. Her father placed the train ticket on the trunk lid without looking at her. Her mother's lips brushed her cheek with all the warmth of a cold wind. And Phoebe. Phoebe stood at the door, arms crossed, the corner of her mouth curled in a smile that wasn't quite hidden. Victory looked good on her. Carol lifted the trunk herself. No one offered to carry it. The weight bit into her palms as she walked toward the station, each step heavier than the last. The town still slept, roofs rimmed in frost smoke, rising from a few stubborn chimneys. She had grown up here, invisible among familiar faces. Now she was being sent away, to a man she had never met, a man who believed he had written letters to her sister. She paused once, at the crossroads trunk, sat down on the frozen dirt. The wind came sharp, tugging strands of her hair, loose from its ribbon. She whispered to the empty road words, so low, even the morning could barely hear them. If he sends me back, I'll have nowhere left to go. Her voice broke on the last word, but no one answered. Only the whistle of the train carried across the prairie, long and mournful, like a warning she could not turn from. When she climbed into the carriage that would take her westward, the seat creaked beneath her. Her heart thudded against her ribs, a fragile drum, keeping time to a journey she hadn't chosen. She folded her hands in her lap, nails bitten short, and stared out the window at the land that receded behind her. Nebraska faded mile by mile, but the truth of it clung close. Carol Hale was not wanted here, and she was being sent as the shadow of another. Yet somewhere beyond the horizon in the wide Wyoming territory, a man named Michael Walker was waiting. She did not know that he already carried her memory in his heart, that years ago in a blizzard, he had seen her courage and never forgotten. She did not know that every letter written in her sister's name had been truly meant for her. For now, Carol only knew she was leaving as a substitute, with nothing but fear in her chest and a trunk of second-hand belongings at her feet. The whistle screamed again, and the train lurched forward, carrying her toward a fate that would either break her or finally show her what she was worth. The coach wheels groaned against the rutted trail, the jolt of every stone rattling Carol Hale's bones. She clutched the worn strap above her head, her trunk wedged against her knees, her heart heavier than both. The Nebraska plains had slipped behind hours ago, and the land now stretched wider, more untamed, as though it were daring her to keep breathing. Across from her sat Matilda O'Rourke, a woman in her 40s, with a sharp chin and eyes that missed nothing. She wore widow's black, though the hat was askew, and her hands were never still knitting, tapping the side of the coach when the horses faltered. She had been the first to speak when Carol boarded, and she hadn't stopped since. "First trip west?" Matilda asked now, her voice brisk, carrying over the rumble of the wheels. Carol hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. Going to family." A pause. Carol swallowed. "To a husband." Matilda's eyebrows shot up. "Mail order, then?" "Not cruel, just matter of fact. It's a gamble, but so's everything worth doing. The West eats the foolish for breakfast, but the stubborn, it tends to keep them." Carol looked down at her hands, the nails bitten short, the skin rough from years of chores. Stubborn. She wasn't sure if that word belonged to her. She had only ever been pliant, obedient, the daughter who bent under her father's orders, who carried her sister's shadow without protest. Matilda leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Listen to me, girl. You'll meet all manner of men out here. Some will promise heaven and hand you dust. Some will look at you like you're nothing but extra baggage. But once in a while, once in a rare while, you find one who's steady, who'll work the land same as you, who'll bleed for it, pray over it, curse it, and still call it home. If you get that one, you hold fast." The words tugged at something inside Carol. She nodded, though her throat tightened with doubt. Michael Walker knew her name only because of her sister. He expected a golden-haired beauty, not the plain girl sitting in a swaying stagecoach, afraid of her own reflection. By late afternoon, the coach rolled into San Miguel Station. The town looked half-born buildings, sprouting along the dusty street, like seedlings fighting for water. A saloon leaned against the sun, its swinging doors creaking. A general store stood opposite windows clouded by dust. A handful of townsfolk loitered near the platform, watching with open curiosity as the coach pulled to a stop. Carol's pulse hammered. She smoothed the wrinkles from her travel dress, though dust had already settled deep into the fabric. The driver swung the door open, offering his hand. Her legs trembled as she stepped down, boots striking dirt that felt foreign and final. "Miss Hale." The voice stopped her. Deep, steady, carrying a calm that contradicted everything inside her. She turned. He stood a few paces away, tall and broad-shouldered, framed by the last burnished rays of sun. Michael Walker. His hat-shadowed eyes the color of storm clouds, sharp and searching, yet softened by something she could not name. His shirt was plain denim sleeves, rolled against strong forearms, a leather vest weathered by years of labor. He looked exactly as the West might shape a man, scarred, resolute, unyielding. Carol's breath caught. She expected anger, disappointment, perhaps even ridicule when he saw she was not Phoebe. Instead, his gaze rested on her face with a kind of quiet recognition, as though he had always known it would be her. Her voice cracked. She tried again. My sister, she isn't coming. My father sent me in her place. If you wish to send me back, I understand. I brought enough for the fare. Michael studied her, unreadable. The silence stretched until Carol thought her knees might give way. Then, to her astonishment, he nodded slowly. You'll eat first, he said, voice even low. After that, you'll choose. You can come to my place, head on to Denver, or take the road back east. Whatever you decide, it'll be your choice, not mine. Carol blinked, stunned. She had prepared for rejection, braced for scorn. But this calm courtesy she had not expected. Why was he not furious? Why no bitterness for the deception her family had played? Matilda O'Rourke stepped down behind her eyes, flicking between them, with the satisfaction of a woman who had seen many beginnings. Well, she muttered with a grin, seems you've found the rare sort, girl. Carol's cheeks burned as Michael reached for her trunk, lifting it as though it weighed nothing. His hand brushed hers only briefly, but in that fleeting touch was something steady, something warm, something that whispered she was no stranger to him at all. As he led her toward the wagon, waiting at the edge of town, Carol's heart thudded harder. Questions pressed against her ribs like thorns. Why was he so calm? Why did he look at her not as a substitute, but as if she had been expected all along? The West stretched before her, vast and uncertain. And for the first time since leaving Nebraska, Carol wondered if perhaps she had not been cast off at all, but called into something greater than she had ever imagined. The Walker Ranch spread wide beneath the Wyoming ski rough-hewn fences stretching into the golden haze of late afternoon. Carol Hale stepped down from Michael's wagon, her boots pressing into dust that carried the smell of horses, cattle, and long seasons of toil. She clutched her small trunk as though it were her only anchor, her heart racing at the thought of entering a stranger's home, though Michael Walker hardly felt like a stranger in the way he regarded her, calm and steady, as if he had known her long before this moment. The house itself was modest, but strong boards weathered by wind and snow, the porch sturdy under Michael's boots. No lace curtains or ornamental trim softened its lines. It was a house built by a soldier's hands, more fortress than parlor. And yet when he opened the door and gestured for her to enter, Carol felt a surprising warmth, the crackle of a fire, the scent of stew lingering, the quiet order of a man who lived with purpose rather than indulgence. You'll find it plain, Michael said, setting her trunk inside, but plain things last longest out here. His voice carried neither apology nor pride, only truth. Carol nodded, grateful for the honesty. She was tired of facades, of letters that painted false pictures of a father's decisions made with ice in his eyes. Before she could answer, a boy barreled into the room. 10, perhaps 11, with hair sticking out like straw, and mischief written plain across his face. Uncle Mike, he shouted, then skidded to a halt, blinking at Carol. His eyes narrowed with suspicion. Who's she? This is Miss Hale, Michael replied evenly. She'll be staying with us. The boy folded his arms. She don't look like a bride. His words cut sharper than he knew, striking Carol's sorest place. Heat rose to her cheeks, but she steadied herself, forcing a small smile. And you don't look like a ranch hand, she answered softly, but I reckon you can be one, all the same. For a moment, The boy stared, then his mouth twitched into something between a smirk and surrender. Michael's gaze flicked to her. Was that approval in his eyes? Carol could not tell, but her pulse steadied. The days that followed unfolded with the rhythm of ranch life. Carol rose before dawn, her hands quick to help in the kitchen, though the pots were heavy, and her back ached from travel. She learned where Michael kept the flour, how he favored coffee strong enough to sting the tongue, and how Lark, his orphaned nephew, hid biscuits in his pockets when he thought no one was looking. Slowly, the boy's mischief softened into curiosity, and he lingered at her side more often than he teased. Michael treated her with respect that unsettled and comforted in equal measure. He did not command her work, nor presume her place. Instead, he invited, "Would you help mend this fence?" or simply shared space with her as they hauled boards together, their hands brushing once in the cool morning air. Each time Carol's heart stumbled, reminding her she was here only by substitution, the second choice sent in her sister's stead. And yet, when she looked at Michael, she wondered if he saw something different, if he saw her at all. The townsfolk were slower to accept. Whispers curled at the edges of the general store, women calling her the replacement bride, as if the words were a brand upon her skin. Carol lowered her eyes, but held her ground, carrying flour and sugar back to the wagon without complaint. That night, Michael worked beside her to repair a broken hinge on the barn door, his hands rough with scars of war. "You needn't mind their talk," he said quietly. "The prairie doesn't care who you were, only who you are when the storms come." Carol looked at him, then at the firelight, carving lines of endurance across his face, and something within her stirred something that wondered if perhaps she was not here to replace anyone, but to begin again. The morning sun lay pale over Walker Ranch, brushing the wide pastures with a muted gold. Carol had just come in from feeding the hens, her apron dusted with grain, when she heard the crunch of wagon wheels on the yard. Michael stepped out of the barn, wiping his hand against his vest. His jaw tightened at the sight of Sheriff Kellum and Abel Fisk climbing down from the rig, their boots raising little puffs of dust that looked almost too deliberate. Carol froze near the porch, clutching her apron, as though it might shield her. Abel Fisk, the town's banker, carried a bundle of papers under his arm. He was a heavy man, face flushed not from labor, but from the comfort of coin. Sheriff Kellum followed at his side, his badge catching the morning light. Yet his eyes shifted uneasy, like a man already caught in compromise. "Morning," Walker Fisk called, voice slick with practiced authority. "We've come on business of importance." Michael didn't move closer. He stood tall, broad shoulders, squared, his expression carved from stone. Stated plain. Fisk unfolded the papers with the drama of a man accustomed to power. "By lawful record, this here is a proxy marriage contract. Signed by Miss Phoebe Hale, witnessed by Gideon Cross, and recognized by Reverend Pike. It binds her to you, Michael Walker, as your rightful wife." The words struck Carol like a lash. Her breath stilled, her heart stumbling against her ribs. Phoebe's name, her sister's name, inked onto paper that should never have existed. She felt suddenly smaller, the old wound of being the substitute raw and stinging again. Michael's voice was steady, but Carol heard the storm beneath it. "Phoebe Hale isn't here, and this contract is worth less than the ink on it." Kellum cleared his throat, trying to sound official, though his eyes never lifted from the dust. "The law don't see it that way. Proxy marriages are binding provided the signatures hold." Fisk smiled, slow and oily. "And they do. Which means half this land, including the north pasture, now falls under your wife's claim. Unless, of course, we arrange matters differently. You have 10 days to resolve it, Walker. 10 days before the bank enforces seizure." Carol's stomach turned. The words were a trap, every syllable a rope drawing tighter. 10 days. As if the whole of Michael's life's work could be stolen in the span of a fortnight, under the guise of law. Michael stepped forward at last, his presence filling the yard. "Get off my land," he said, voice low, but cutting. "Tell Gideon Cross I'll see him in hell before I be into his tricks." Fisk's smile thinned. "You'll regret your pride, Walker. 10 days. He tucked the papers back into his coat. Sheriff Kellum shifted, looking anywhere but at Michael, before following the banker to the wagon. The wheels rolled away, leaving silence heavy as smoke. Carol gripped the railing of the porch, her knuckles white. Michael stood unmoving, eyes fixed on the horizon, as though it might offer clarity. She wanted to speak, to ask what this meant for them, for her, but the words lodged in her throat. Later, when the house quieted, Carol wandered into Michael's study. The room smelled faintly of tobacco and leather books, stacked neatly on the shelves. On the desk lay scattered papers, some folded, some torn. One sheet lay open, and her gaze caught the first line, "Dearest Miss Hale." Her chest constricted. She reached out with trembling fingers, brushing the ink as though it might vanish. The letter spoke in Michael's hand, formal, but yearning, the words of a man laying his heart bare. But to whom? To Phoebe, as everyone believed, or to her? The question burned sharper than the banker's threats. Carol pressed the paper back onto the desk, her eyes blurring. 1,000 memories surged: her father's cold decree, Phoebe's smirk at the door, the long train ride west. She had come here believing herself only a substitute, a shadow. And now, even in Michael's home, evidence whispered she might still be second best. Yet when Michael entered the room, his gaze found her immediately. For a moment, his expression softened, almost as if he'd been caught in confession. But he said nothing. Carol turned away quickly, the words she longed to ask dying in her throat. Somewhere beyond these walls, men plotted to strip Michael of his land. But here in the quiet study, her greater fear was more intimate, that Michael's heart, like the forged papers, might still belong to Phoebe. By mid-afternoon, the sky was bruised steel wind combing the grass. Carol felt the hush before the first drop, the way birds vanished, and the cattle lifted their heads. Lark whooped, dragging tack in. Michael's voice cut through the gusts. "Latch the east doors. Pen the mares close." Rain hammered down sudden and hard. Carol's skirts clung as she heaved a gate shut. The creek below swelled into a dark rush. Through the gray, she heard it, a high, ragged bleat. "Foal!" she cried. A pale shape bobbed in the torrent, a leg tangled in branches jammed against a fallen log. The head dipped, surface dipped again. Michael didn't hesitate. He slid down the bank. "Rope!" he called. Carol snatched the keel. She looped it around her waist, through 2 turns around a cottonwood, with roots like ribs, and heaved the free end toward him. The current wrenched him sideways as he caught it. Water rose to his chest, muddy and fast. "Hold, Carol," he said. She wrapped the line across her hips and leaned back, becoming an anchor. Michael shoved to the jam, shoulder set, fingers groping for the foal's slick foreleg. The branches bit deeper, as if the creek wanted what it had taken. The rope hissed over wet bark. Carol felt it bite her ribs. "You have him," she shouted. "Almost." He braced and levered. The log gave a fraction, just enough for the current to slam him broadside. He vanished. The line snapped tight, yanking Carol forward to the edge. Mud sluiced. The bank crumbled. "Michael." The storm flung his name back. She dropped to her knees and hauled, hand over hand, palms burning. "Come on." Something dark broke the surface, his hat, then his shoulder, then his face, white and set. He shoved the foal into the shallows as the line took his weight. Carol leaned back, spine to the cottonwood, and dragged him toward gravel. Lark slid down the slope. "I've got the mare," he shouted, catching the trembling dam's halter. The foal thrashed once, then found its legs and staggered to her side. When Michael's boots scraped the bank, Carol let go the rope and reached for him. They slumped against the tree breath, tearing rain stinging. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to his heat against her hearts, hammering like fists on a door. He laughed. You tied yourself to a cottonwood. I wasn't letting the creek take you, she said fiercer than she meant to. They got the horses penned and lurched into the kitchen dripping. Michael stuffed wood into the stove and struck a flame. Coffee steamed soon dark and strong. Change before you freeze, he said. So will you. He peeled off his soaked shirt and tugged on a dry one from a peg. White sears laddered his shoulder. Carol turned away, but heat found her face. She returned in her second dress, hair unpinned. They sat close to the stove. Outside, the creek muttered into banks. Thank you, he said at last, for holding. You went under, she whispered. I thought. She stopped. His eyes drifted to the white scar at her left wrist. Storm's as good a time as any, he murmured. For what? Her fingers tightened on the cup. The truth. He watched the fire. 2 winters ago, blizzard on the Cheyenne Trail, I staggered into a way station, barely alive. A girl with a red scarf and patched mittens took the ice from my hands with snow, not water. She poured coffee strong enough to wake a corpse and read the Psalms low. When I shook so hard I couldn't hold the cup, she held it. She left before dawn. Said her father would be angry if he knew she'd helped a stranger. Her breath went shallow. Memory lit the scar at her wrist. You, she said. I never forgot. His voice roughened. Later I passed your father's place. Saw you at the gate with a pail, knew the set of your shoulders. I also saw how he looked past you. That's when I started writing. To Phoebe. To the only Hale your father would heed, he answered. I wrote to the sister he prized because it was the single door that might open. Every word I penned I meant for you, Carol. I hoped you'd find yourself between the lines. If Phoebe came, I would have told her the truth and sent her home. He lifted his gaze. I can't offer more than a hard country and a man who works it. But I won't claim you by trick or pressure. The stove clicked. You should have told me, she said, the edge dulled by the room's steadiness. I should have, he said. But I needed you here because you decided it. Not because a man's scheme fenced you in. He reached careful and brushed a damp curl from her temple. The space between them tightened to a breath. She leaned, then caught herself heart rioting. Not because of a storm, he said, stopping his own motion. Not because I almost drowned and you refused to let go. When I kiss you, it will be after you've chosen who you are to yourself. She held his gaze. Something long trampled inside her lifted its head. Outside, last drops ticked from the eaves like a clock starting again. She cradled the cup and let the heat sink bone deep. In the wake of water and confession, the world felt thin-skinned and bright, like a foal just finding its legs. For the first time in years, she understood the tenderness and terror of a wide-open gate, not exile, but the start of a road she might walk by her own choosing. The bell over Briggs's general store gave its thin, tinny jingle as Carol stepped inside with Michael and Lark. Dust motes drifted in a sunbar through the high windows. Shelves sagged with flour sacks and lamp oil. Conversations faltered. Carol felt stares prickle her back like burrs snagging homespun. Outside, iron-rimmed wheels rattled to a stop. A glossy buggy matched bays tossing manes. Phoebe swept in, first pink silk parasol tilted just so beauty bright as cut glass. Gideon Cross followed with a gambler's grin, and city slick boots hat brim low to hide his eyes. Perfume drowned the smell of kerosene. Dearest sister, Phoebe sang as if affection could erase years of indifference. Her gaze skimmed Carol's plain dress, then lodged on Michael with proprietary warmth. Mr. Walker. At last. She offered him a gloved hand as though he'd been waiting all his life to kiss it. He didn't. Gideon tipped his hat to no one in particular. Business brings us. His smile showed too many teeth. Sheriff Kellum loitered near the pickle barrel, studying the ceiling boards as if they held scripture. Abel Fisk entered last, patting the breast of his coat where folded papers rustled. Phoebe's voice softened for the crowd. I had prospects back east. But fate has a truer plan. I'm here to set right a misunderstanding. Father engaged me to Mr. Walker. Letters, arrangements, the expectations of decent people. Her eyes flicked like pins toward Carol. I'm afraid someone muddled the parts. Carol steadied a sack of beans against her hip. The room tilted, then leveled. She thought of rain on tin, of a rope cinched around her waist, of the feel of choosing to hold. No parts were assigned, she said quietly. Lives aren't theater. Michael stepped to her side, solid as fence post cedar. She speaks for herself, he told the room, voice carrying. No one speaks over her. A hush rippled, the kind that arrives when something truer than law is said aloud. Gideon unfolded a document with flourish. Luckily, paper does speak. An amended affidavit, perfectly proper, clarifies the rightful bride. Reverend Pike stands ready to certify on Sunday. Simple correction. Walker. You accept, you keep your peace. You refuse the bank proceeds. Fisk's smile oiled the words, 10 days as stated. Kellum cleared his throat. Just doing my duty, he murmured to the rafters. Lark edged closer to Carol's small shoulder, pressing her skirt. She laid a steadying hand on his hair palm, remembering the heat of a rescued foal and the anchoring of a cottonwood root. Phoebe moved nearer, silk whispering. Come home with me, Carol. Father will forgive your overstep. You were always tender-hearted, not meant for this coarse life. Leave men's work to men. Her smile was sugar. Let those who were chosen fulfill what was promised. I wasn't chosen, Carol said, eyes level. I'm choosing. The word surprised her with its weight, like a key, long hidden, found its lock. And I'm not leaving. Michael's hand hovered near the small of her back, never presuming. Mail order letters were meant to build a partnership, he told Phoebe, steady as rain after drought. Not a ladder to climb a man's fence, not a deed to his land. He glanced at Gideon. And not a racket for card sharps. Matilda O'Rourke, 2 aisles over with a spool of thread, snorted. Amen. Esme Valdez, selecting nails, let her gaze rest flat on Gideon until his grin thinned. Murmurs rose, curiosity, then something like approval, faint but real, moving through the store like a breeze in dry grass. Fisk patted his papers. Sentiment doesn't balance ledgers. The affidavit stands, unless otherwise proven. Sunday, Reverend Pike will rectify the record. He tipped his hat to Phoebe, courtly as a vulture. Madam. Phoebe's eyes glittered. Wear something respectable, sister. You'll want to look your best when you hand me the ring. A pause, the faintest curl of lip. If you have one. Carol opened her mouth, but Michael answered, voice dropping to iron. There will be no ring traded by coercion, and no woman named by any pen but her own. He looked past Fisk to Kellum. Sheriff, if you still wear that star, remember the law's not a cudgel for bankers. Kellum blushed a slow red. I hear you. Gideon tapped the paper with one gloved finger. Sunday, then. He offered his arm. Phoebe took it, silk rustling like sarcasm. The bell jangled as they swept out, perfume-trailing wheels clattering toward the hotel. Valence held a beat, then cracked. Matilda planted her hands on her hips. Well, I'll be switched. Girl, you stood. Esme nodded once, flinty approval. Briggs coughed into his sleeve and pretended to rearrange beans. Michael turned to Carol. Are you all right? She drew a breath, tasted dust and dignity. I'm tired of being spoken for. But I'm not tired of standing. Her hand found Lark's shoulder again. Not tired at all. Outside wind flicked the corner of the store calendar. 10 days. Inside, Michael laid exact coins on Briggs's counter, gathered the flour, and shouldered the weight without complaint. When he offered Carol the smaller sack, he didn't tell her what to do. He walked beside her as she chose it. The weight of 10 days hung over the ranch, like a storm that never broke. Carol felt it in the silence at supper, in the wary glances of townsfolk, in the way Michael's shoulders carried more than the day's work. Each dawn he rode the fences with Lark trailing behind, as though walking the boundary lines might keep them safe. But danger had a way of seeping in through cracks. One evening, as lantern light glowed in the barn, Lark came running, face pale, hair windblown. "Uncle Mike, Carol." His breath came, hard words tumbling. "I heard them. Sheriff Kellum and Mr. Fisk with Gideon. Down by the livery. They were talking about the north pasture." Michael set down his hammer, eyes sharpening. "What did you hear?" Lark swallowed, gaze darting between them. "They said if you don't sign the affidavit by Sunday, they'll seize the land anyway." Sheriff promised to look the other way. "And Gideon," he said, "Phoebe's their ace. That folks will believe her no matter what, because she looks the part." The boy's voice cracked. "They laughed, Uncle. Said you'd fight, but paper always wins." Carol reached for Lark, steadying his trembling hands. Anger and shame churned in her chest. Once more, she was painted as the mistake, the stand-in, while Phoebe's beauty was wielded like a weapon sharper than any knife. Michael's jaw flexed, but his hand rested firm on the boy's shoulder. "You did right to tell us." His gaze met Carol's across the dim barn. "Now we know where they stand." It was Esme Valdez who brought the first real glimmer of reprieve. She arrived the next morning, skirts damp from dew, eyes flinty with resolve. In her hands, she carried a weather-worn ledger, its leather cracked corners frayed. "Silas kept accounts," she said, voice brisk. "And not just of cattle and corn." She laid the book on Michael's table, flipping to a page where inked lines marched like soldiers. "Here entries of payments. Each coin noted, each recipient named. And here Phoebe Hale, marked clear as day. Money for letters sent, postage-covered gifts purchased. Your sister didn't answer you, Walker. She bought her words." Carol's breath caught. Her father's script sprawled across the page, damning in its detail. Silas had tracked every penny, proof that Phoebe's letters, the very letters that brought Carol here, were nothing more than transactions, bargains struck for advantage. Esme's gaze softened when it shifted to Carol. "I suspected, but I waited for the right time. The town deserves truth, and so do you." Michael's hand brushed the page, tracing the ink with a quiet fury. "This ledger is stronger than any affidavit Gideon can conjure. They've built their case on lies. Now we'll burn it down with the truth." Carol closed the book gently, though her fingers trembled. For the first time she felt the tide shifting, not because someone had spoken for her, but because evidence proved she was never the imposter they claimed. The shame that had shadowed her began to lift, replaced by something fiercer, the determination to stand no matter who called her substitute. Outside, clouds gathered again, wind rattling the shutters. But this time Carol felt steadier. The storm might come, and with it, Phoebe's venom and Gideon's schemes. Yet in her hands lay proof, and at her side stood a man who had never once flinched from truth. Together they would meet whatever Sunday brought. Dawn spread pale and cold across the Walker ranch, the light soft as ash, the sky carrying the weight of a reckoning. The birch grove on the edge of the north pastures stood stark against the horizon, silver trunks gleaming like watchful sentinels. Carol walked there with Michael at her side, and Lark trailing close, the boy unusually quiet, the gravity of the day pressing down on even his restless spirit. The sound of wagons came first, then the stomp of boots. Abel Fisk, thick-set in his banker's coat, carried his ledgers like a weapon. Sheriff Kellum trailed behind, face set in a mask of duty that did not reach his eyes. And at their head strode Gideon Cross, his grin sharp as a knife's edge, Phoebe on his arm in silk too fine for prairie dust. The sight made Carol's chest tighten, not from envy, but from the bitter knowledge of her sister's intent. Phoebe's beauty was no longer a shield. It was a blade she wielded to cut Carol down. Michael planted his boots in the dirt, his stance unyielding. "This land won't be signed away on false words," he said. His voice carried across the pastures steady as a rifle shot. Gideon pulled a folded paper from his coat and waved it. "The contract is clear. Signed by Phoebe Hale. Witnessed by myself. Endorsed by Reverend Pike. 10 days are up, Walker." "Not yet," Carol said, her voice slicing the morning air. She stepped forward, clutching the weather-worn ledger Esme had given her. Her fingers trembled, but she opened it wide so all could see. "These are Father's accounts. Every coin marked, every scheme recorded. Phoebe's letters weren't written in love. They were bought, staged by money, planned like theater." Gasps rippled through the gathered crowd, neighbors, townsfolk, men who had come half curious, half hungry for scandal. Phoebe's face blanched, then hardened. "You lie," she snapped. But Reverend Pike, standing near the back, stumbled forward. His hands shook as he clutched his Bible, like a drowning man clings to driftwood. "It's true." His voice cracked. "Gideon paid me. Paid me to stamp that contract, though no vow was ever spoken, no bride ever stood at the altar. I betrayed my calling. He faltered, eyes on Carol, shame bowing his shoulders. "I cannot let the lie stand." The crowd erupted, shouts, murmurs, curses flung toward Gideon, toward Phoebe. Carol's heart hammered, but she stood straighter. For once she was not silent, not overshadowed. She was the one holding truth in her hands. Then Gideon's snarl cut through the chaos. "Enough." In a blink, he lunged, seizing Lark by the collar, yanking the boy against him. A pistol gleamed in his other hand, pressed hard to the child's temple. Lark froze, eyes wide, mouth open in terror. Michael's revolver was already half drawn, but Gideon jerked Lark closer, shielding himself with the boy's small frame. "Drop it," he hissed. "Drop it, Walker, or the boy dies." Time seemed to fracture. Carol saw Michael's jaw lock, his eyes tormented as he slowly lowered his gun. The land, the fight, the years of labor, they all weighed nothing against Lark's life. He let the weapon fall into the dirt. Carol's pulse slowed. Fear did not vanish, but it became something sharper, clearer. She stepped forward, her voice low and steady. "Gideon," she said almost gently, "you think this will end with you holding a child? Look around." The crowd had circled, eyes burning with anger. Phoebe's lips trembled, her arm still clutching Gideon's, but without conviction. Abel Fisk shifted uneasily, realizing the tea had turned. "You want land," Carol continued, "but you'll leave with chains. Because I'll scream, and every rifle in this crowd will fire. You'll fall before you ever touch this soil." Her eyes locked on Lark's. "Now when I tell you, duck." Gideon's sneer faltered. "You're bluffing." But Lark, brave beyond his years, caught the flicker in Carol's gaze. In one motion, he dropped to his knees, jerking sideways. The pistol shifted just enough. A crack split the air. Esme Valdez's rifle, steady from the wagon bed, fired true. Gideon collapsed, the gun skittering harmlessly into the grass. The crowd roared, some in shock, some in triumph. Carol ran to Lark, pulling him into her arms, her heart pounding with the wild relief of survival. Michael was beside her, his hand gripping her shoulder, eyes fierce with pride and gratitude. Silence slowly fell as the sheriff bent to disarm the crumpled gambler. Abel Fisk muttered curses under his breath, already retreating toward town. Phoebe stood alone, silk dress sagging, as though all the air had been drawn from it. Michael turned then, pulling the forged marriage papers from Gideon's coat. Without ceremony, he struck a match and held the flame to the edge. The parchment curled, blackened, and fell to ash at his boots. The crowd watched spellbound as the lie disintegrated into smoke. When the last scrap was gone, Michael reached into his pocket. He pulled free not a ring, but a folded envelope, a train ticket money tucked within. He held it out to Carol, his voice rough but steady. There's no contract here, no bargain. If you stay, it's because you choose it. If you go, the road is yours. Carol's throat tightened, eyes blurring as she stared at the ticket that could send her back east, back to a life of shadows. Her hands shook, but her voice was clear. I won't leave, she said. I choose the man who never once treated me as property. Michael's eyes softened, the storm within them finally breaking. And as the birch trees swayed overhead, their pale bark catching the first true light of morning, Carol knew she was no longer the substitute. She was the woman who had chosen and been chosen in return. The birch grove still held the hush of what had just transpired. Gideon lay bound, the forged contract reduced to ash, and Phoebe stood apart, her finery limp in the morning wind. Carol felt the pulse of her own heartbeat in her fingertips as she clutched Lark close, the weight of choice still warm on her lips. It was Reverend Pike who broke the silence. The old minister stepped forward, shoulders slumped with shame, Bible clutched against his chest. His voice wavered, but it carried. I sinned against this town and against my calling. I took silver for silence and lent my name to a lie. I will not let the day end with deceit still standing. His eyes sought Carol's, wet with contrition. If you'll allow me, let me set it right, here and now, before God and all these witnesses. A murmur rose from the townsfolk, Matilda's hearty eye leading, Esme's firm nod following. Michael turned to Carol, not asking, not assuming, but waiting. And Carol, who had been sent as a substitute, who had walked in her sister's shadow and borne the scorn of strangers, lifted her chin. Yes, she said, voice steady. Let truth be spoken at last. So it was that beneath the pale trunks, with sunlight slipping between the leaves, Reverend Pike opened his Bible and began the vows. Esme stood at Carol's side, her hand squeezing in silent solidarity. Matilda dabbed her eyes with the corner of her apron, muttering blessings through sniffles. The townsfolk who had once called her the replacement now leaned forward with expectant faces. Michael's voice was low, but sure, as he vowed to cherish and protect, not as possession, but as partner. Carol's words trembled at first, then gathered strength, her promise ringing with a freedom she had never known. When Pike declared them husband and wife, a cheer rose, ragged and heartfelt. Hands clapped, hats flew into the air, and the grove echoed with laughter. Carol felt tears streak her cheeks, but for once, they were not born of shame or fear. They were release, pure and long delayed. Michael's hand closed over hers, rough, warm, unwavering. Weeks later, the ranch bore the marks of renewal. Fence posts lined the north pasture, fresh-cut cedar hammered into the earth. Michael swung the mallet with practiced rhythm, and Carol steadied each stake, Lark racing along the rails with boyish pride. The ski long dry darkened with heavy clouds, the scent of rain rising from the soil. Carol paused, a folded note tucked safe against her bodice. Matilda's handwriting sprawled across the paper, every word praising the courage Carol had found. You were never the substitute. You were the answer all along. She pressed it beside another scrap, the draft letter Michael had once written, Dearest Miss Hale, now crossed out and replaced with her name in firm, unshakable ink, Carol. Thunder rolled low, then the first cool drops spattered against her skin. She lifted her face to the sky, laughing, as the rain came harder, washing dust from leaves and crow from memory. Michael's hand reached for hers, calloused fingers lacing with her own. Lark whooped and spun in the downpour, the sound ringing like church bells. Together they stood beneath the weeping heavens, not as a man rescuing a cast-off, nor as a woman surviving on borrowed chance, but as two souls who had chosen and been chosen. The rain did not promise ease, nor did the west promise gentleness. But as their hands gripped tight, and the birch leaves danced silver green in the storm, Carol knew the land was no longer exile. It was home. In the harsh stories of the Wild West, beauty and schemes do not always prevail. I believe the truest strength lies in loyalty and a choice made freely from the heart. Carol, once dismissed as a mere substitute, proved that a simple woman could become the very center of love and family. And Michael, who had loved her quietly for so long, showed us that the greatest act of devotion is not possession, but granting freedom to choose. Perhaps out here on the windswept frontier, nothing is stronger than a love that is chosen, and nothing is more beautiful than two hands clasped together beneath the rain of renewal. The truest strength lies in loyalty and a choice made freely from the heart. Carol, once dismissed as a mere substitute, proved that a simple woman could become the very center of love and family. And Michael, who had loved her quietly for so long, showed us that the greatest act of devotion is not possession, but granting freedom to choose. Perhaps out here on the windswept frontier, nothing is stronger than a love that is chosen, and nothing is more beautiful than two hands clasped together beneath the rain of renewal.